one of the things that really influenced me very early on was a very strong social conscience, in a sense that, we should also just try to make the world in whatever way we can a little bit of a better place. We had these really key defining moments, these moments where we had to ask, what is that next mountain to climb? I didn't call it an inflection moment then, but I realized, how we navigated those would really make or break success for many years to come. I think the key thing is to think long-term first and set a long-term North Star and direction for where you want your organization to go over, let's say a 5 to 10 year time frame. And if that clarity is there about how do we see the problem differently, where do we want to position ourselves, what makes us fresh and unique, and how is that linking to what drives us as real leaders and human beings, the company will be much more distinctive in the marketplace. So often the best advice I would give on leadership to anyone thinking about it already in it is to find something big in yourself, find a problem, an area that you feel you really care about, get lost in the problem and do whatever you need to do to make a difference. And all of the kind of imposter syndrome, fear, nervousness, that'll go away because the problem is so worthwhile and big as well.
And this episode is in collaboration with Bridge India, a UK award-winning progressive non-profit think tank dedicated to discourse on public policy. With Bridge India, the Mohua show will provide a larger platform for UK stories to reach the Indian diaspora and vice versa. Hi, in today's episode, we have with us Sharath Jeevan, founder of Intrinsic Labs. It is a globally recognized authority on leadership at inflection moments. So we are going to understand a lot more about Inflection from Sharath today. This is about supporting leaders and organizations to future-proof success. Sharath advises diverse organizations, including global corporations, public sector bodies, non-profits, growth businesses, and venture funds. He also teaches leadership at Oxford and Cambridge universities. His second book, Inflection, highlights this expertise. Awarded an OBE and an honorary doctorate, Sharath holds degrees from Cambridge, Oxford, and INSEAD. He founded STIR, Stir Education and Teaching Leaders, impacting over 10 million children worldwide. Yes, you heard that right. 10 million children worldwide. Welcome, Sharath, in today's episode. So I am intrigued with such an amazing biodata. Tell me a little bit about you and your background.
Thanks, Moj. Lots to be proud, but also humble about, honestly, as well. I was born in India, in Chennai, in the south of India, came to the UK when I was about 4 years old, spent a few years here and then went to the Middle East. My parents were and are still practicing doctors. They moved there for about 7 years and came back to the UK for my last years of high school and then university, and it's been kind of home since in a large way. I think for me, one of the things that really influenced me very early on was a very strong social conscience, in a sense that I think it came from my own grandparents, often the summers in India, that, we should also just try to make the world in whatever way we can a little bit of a better place. And after about 10 years in the corporate world, I took about 15 years as a social entrepreneur. I founded, as you mentioned, 2 nonprofit organizations, one in the UK trying to improve the quality of leadership in some of our most challenging schools in the country. But about 10 years working a lot in India, actually a lot in East Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, looking at the workforce, motivation, leadership there. And it was just an amazing experience. I just learned so much, made many mistakes as a leader, but we got to tens of thousands of schools in India alone. But about 3.5 years ago, just before the pandemic, I was starting to feel a little bit of a founder syndrome type issues. I felt I was losing that edge, and I wanted to always stay relevant and on top of things. And so I made quite a tough decision to try to step down from the organization and focus my next career on helping other leaders who are boxing in the ring box better, and helping them be really effective in their own right, especially as they face these inflection moments in their organizations and careers.
So amazing. I love the way you said, boxing better in their boxing ring. That's fantastic. It's such a lovely way to put it. It's really like a pressure cooker that most of them are in. And, these skills are so extremely important because it affects their personal lives, their relationships all around them. So, but what inspired you to work in the field of education and intrinsic motivation? Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I guess being an immigrant in the UK, I think education had always been a big value. I think many my parents, other families coming to the UK as immigrants felt very much education was their propeller for progress, for also acclimatizing in a new society and country. As well, I was lucky to have a very open education, have amazing teachers who believed in me as well, including in many things that I'm from a family of doctors, no? So I'm the only one really to have not gone down that path and taken a very different path. So I think one of the things that really persuaded me to spend 15 years of my career focusing on that question was that it felt like a lot of kids in India and the UK and other places didn't have those role models and relationships around them to enable them to achieve their full potential. And some of it is to do with things like textbooks or how teaching and so on, but much of it was more cultural. And I think I spent quite a lot of time thinking about what will help motivate a teacher to really want to teach a child well, what will motivate a child to really want to learn and engage. And that was a lot of the basis of my first book, Intrinsic, about 2.5 years ago.
Your book Inflection is getting a lot of attention. So could you explain what an inflection point is and why is it very crucial, for leaders?
Yeah, so when I look back at my 15 years as a CEO, it wasn't like every day counted equal. It wasn't that it was a day-to-day thing. Of course, that day-to-day execution, consistency is very important, no question. But when I reflect back, I think we had these really key defining moments, these moments where we had to ask, what is that next mountain to climb? I didn't call it an inflection moment then, but I realized, how we navigated those would really make or break success for many years to come. For example, when the government in Delhi in India, when I was working in India, asked us to go from about 70 schools to about all 1,050 schools almost overnight. We had the choice of saying yes or no. We said yes in the end, and it was the best decision I think we made because we learned to work at scale, learned to work with government, learned to let go and allow other people to take our approach and really benefit many more young people and children. But I can think of other things I did that weren't, I made the wrong call on it. I realized that how I navigated those moments really future-proofed the success of my organization. That's why now when I work with other leaders, I try to really focus. I'm not a regular advisor or coach. I come in really at those moments of inflection when they're thinking about that next mountain to climb and give them space to reflect, think, really navigate those well. So what comes out is authentic, but also very unique and fresh in terms of the overall landscape they're in as well.
You talk about autonomy, purpose and mastery as the core of intrinsic motivation. So, how do these concepts really apply, to leadership? Can you just explain a little bit about autonomy? Of course, purpose we understand, and how does one master all of this?
Yeah, so autonomy, I think what's happening is a lot of leaders I work with are now in a place where they feel quite under pressure to lead by numbers, if you like, as well, or do what they think their investors want or their board wants or their other partners want. And what comes often more and more is they play safe and they become like any other organization. I see this in the Indian startup scene as an example, where there's so much, it's still a very vibrant scene despite some of the market turbulence. But so many younger founders, or founders of all ages actually, want to just be a little bit better than everyone else. And what happens is they came into their entrepreneurial journey with a very clear perspective on the problem. They had a very clear point of view. As they come in, they start to sort of converge to everyone else. And a lot of the work I'm doing around autonomy is helping leaders feel they have the autonomy to set their own direction. A leader by definition, the way I define it is they take their organization and team to a place they wouldn't have got to otherwise. And that means really embracing the autonomy they've got and being comfortable with it. And so, yeah, almost enabling them to realize that it's their dream, their vision, let them really go for it. And if there are concerns or risks, we can work on that together and de-risk that approach, rather than trying to play safe.
But tell me something, Sharath. I'm very kicked to ask this from you because there are a lot of companies in India where this sort of an autonomy may not always be encouraged because there's a certain system in which an organization has been run, and anyone coming in with new ideas may just be bashed down into what has been the norm till now. So, how do you see that, in India? Because autonomy is extremely important when it comes to leadership, because every leader will bring in their own set of skills, right?
Yeah, what I find again is that if you don't have autonomy, we tend to sort of plateau as an organization, right? Because everything then becomes reliant on the wisdom of the ultimate leader, maybe the CEO. I definitely found that myself. I often fell into that trap sometimes as a CEO myself. And what I learned from that was that the more we can sort of unleash the potential of our teams, allow them to have a point of view, allow them to really take things by in the way they see fit, the whole organization can grow and all of us can step up. And the more and more I think of let's say the CEO or C-suite level of a company, let's say in India, really looking at that long-term perspective, thinking about what is that long-term direction they should be focusing on. Perhaps the level below, maybe the senior management, maybe they could be focusing more on the medium term, how to really ensure the potential of the organization really happens over that medium term time frame. And those earlier in the workforce, perhaps in junior management, can play more of a day-to-day role, a still very important role, but ensuring that all of the day-to-day activities of the company or organization are going well and smoothly. So everyone has a different role, I think, as well. And the more that leaders can step back and step up in that, everyone feels they have autonomy over their areas and everyone can grow and develop together. So that's kind of where we want to land things, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. There's also a sense of ownership then,
Yeah.
whenever you are allowed to grow in a very, very healthy way. Can you share some of the big ideas from Inflection that provides leadership power?
Yeah, so one of the things that makes inflection moments so difficult, right, when we're at this crossroads and thinking of where we go next, what the next mountain is to climb, we have to navigate different time frames and we have to balance the needs for long term, medium term, and short term. I think of the long term a bit like the hour hand of a watch or a clock, the medium term like the minute hand, the second hand more like the short term. And there's that overall learning dial that goes through that. That dial framework is the core sort of mental model behind inflection. I think the key thing is to think long term first and set a long term North Star and direction for where you want your organization to go over, let's say a 5 to 10 year time frame. And if that clarity is there about how do we see the problem differently, where do we want to position ourselves, what makes us fresh and unique, and how is that linking to what drives us as real leaders and human beings, the company will be much more distinctive in the marketplace. It'll tend to raise more capital. If it needs to raise more capital, it'll be more successful in attracting clients or customers or whatever the right metric is. But I think often giving leaders the time to step back and think about that long-term direction is something they don't have. I think especially in countries like India that are moving at such fast pace, we don't have that thinking time, reflection time. We also don't have a sounding board and a critical friend to challenge that thinking regularly. But once that's clear, so I was working with an edutainment company in Africa, for example, a very successful one. They were doing some amazing work, but they did everything in the value chain. They did, distribution, content creation, production. Really, their heart was in R&D and innovation. They were a really innovation player at core. And some of this work, for example, tried to help them really focus on that innovation piece and get other people to do distribution, production. And actually, they built a really powerful ecosystem of partners along that as well. But they themselves were able to be much more focused, play to their strengths, and they raised tens of millions of dollars of additional capital as a result of that positioning. So the key thing is get that direction right and then align team potential around that direction, align culture around it, and keep learning very consciously as you go on that journey in that inflection moment as well.
You've worked extensively, in education through the STIR education. So, what are some of the leadership lessons that you've learned from this experience?
Yeah, I think again back to when you're at these inflection moments, right, I think one of the things that I felt I did well at times, could have done better other times, is just be really conscious of those moments and almost think of your leadership journey like imagine it's a book and you've got different chapters. Each inflection moment makes it a new chapter. So if I think about the STIR experience, that we started off with a pilot model, we were trying to prove this thing worked at small scale. Then we started to scale to Delhi as a city. Then we went across India. Each one of those chapters had a new set of challenges, a new priority. a new kind of team we needed to build to achieve that. And how we aligned everything together became the most important thing. So could we align long-term direction with the kind of team we need to build to grow? Could we really get the culture we wanted to create really bottled and powerful so that it really stood the test of time as the organization grew as well? So yeah, I think so. Remember, just not to think of leadership as one logbook. Really think of it as a series of chapters, and what should the heading of each chapter be? What should the theme of each chapter be? And make sure that you've mastered one chapter before going to the next chapter. That's probably the biggest takeaway I brought from that.
So, you know what, Sharath, everything I think for children also, in homes, I think leaders are also built at home. And, parenting does play a huge role. So, you've mentioned in your talks about the importance of intrinsic motivation in parenting. So, can you just elaborate a little bit more for our listeners? Because we have so many people and India today is really at that cusp where, there's entrepreneurship there's a huge rise, and it comes with a whole lot of challenges and upbringing, the culture you come from, all of that goes on to play a very pivotal role. So, what would you like to share about intrinsic motivation in parenting?
Well, I was in India just a few months ago, and I think one of the things that really strikes me, given how fast the economy and society is growing, it's really exciting, of course, is that I think we've got to have an openness for young people to embrace all these opportunities. We still have a situation where we have huge demand for labor, but also quite large unemployment or underemployment, especially for some of our younger people, right? I think it's some of the highest in the world still. I think a lot of that, of course, is about skilling and education, but also a lot of it's about mindset. And as a parent, I think I speak as the child of Indian parents. There's very much the mental model of career success that I was brought up with was kind of the idea of an escalator. You pick a very safe escalator, then the escalator, the stairs, you'll just keep going up that escalator very smoothly, and it's all going to be beautiful and simple and straightforward. Life, of course, was nothing like that. And what I think about is, life is much more like a zigzag than a straight line. So
Mhm.
how do we master that zigzag? And a lot of it, first of all, is about that sense of emotional and psychological safety. How do young people feel secure in themselves, to understand themselves, feel a value no matter what they're doing, and not worry too much about what other people are thinking or external pressure or parental pressure, but able to find their own path, what really drives them, an area they're passionate about in the world, and also where they can make a unique contribution as well. So I teach, you mentioned I teach at Oxford at the business school. I was teaching last week there. What we were talking a lot about was this idea of a lot of the career mindsets that we get as young people from our parents or from our schools or universities and so on is what I call a career capture model. Let's go after the hottest career out there right now. Let's try and just pick the career. Then we know that if we pick it well, we'll get on the escalator. Everything will be fine. I think instead, what we need to think about is what are the problems in the world we're really interested in making a contribution to. Let's say it's around climate change, as an example, given it's such a hot topic. You could do that as an investor. You could go and join an investment fund. You could go and join a climate tech company or some kind of energy company. You could go in as a policy advisor. There are so many different paths you can take. And I think the world of work, especially with AI, will mean we'll need to move between different careers much more fluidly. This is probably my fifth or sixth career after university. That'll be the norm, especially, given how quickly India is growing and developing. So I think if we can help young people understand that, be open to reinvent themselves, keep learning new things as they go along, but keep being driven by curiosity about what they're really interested in, how they can make a contribution, that can make a profound difference to how they navigate this very exciting but much more uncertain world ahead.
There is a lot of fear with reinvention. So, how do leaders overcome that? Let's just please share with us, your ideas on this.
So one of the things, when I made this career change about 3.5 years ago to actually being more of an advisor to other organizations on their inflection points, I was a consultant early in my career, actually for several years, but I was going to a new form of advisor. I was writing books for the first time. It was a very different kind of career path. I'd been a CEO where all my time was highly, highly structured to a world where I completely had to structure my own time. So almost everything about it, I had a big team before, I had almost no team now. Everything changed. But what you realize, I think, when you reinvent is that many of the things that you did in your previous life, working life, are actually very transferable. The ability to work with people, to be able to convey a message, to persuade people to come on board around something important, your networks and relationships and so on as well. So I think, go back to what you've done in your last role and think about what are those transferable elements? What can I take across to my new world? And actually, often, most of the time, you'll be surprised at how much there is to harness and take. Just need to reframe and think about those things more consciously, really, as well. And the other thing I learned about that was that often when you work, if you really do a good job at something, if you're conscientious, if you care, which most of us, of course, are, people will trust you as a person. And so when you make that career change, they'll be willing to bet on you as opposed to your exact skills and experience you did before. They'll be willing to go on the ride with you as well. And so going back to that, your social capital, people that you've worked with before, that can be a very powerful way to help you make that transition, that inflection in your career personally as well.
Oh, what a beautiful word you've used, Sharath, social capital. And I think this, for our listeners, we need to remember this, that about the relationships and the integrity that you have in your workplaces, that also takes you forward. So, Sharath, would you say that Gen Z is the inflection generation, and how do they navigate their unique challenges?
Yes, Mo. So I'm doing some really interesting new work. I've built what I'm calling a generational success lab, because if you think of the kinds of inflections out there in the world, you have a personal inflection in our own career. We talked about this idea of reinvention in our jobs and our lives. We have organizational inflections when a company or organization is going through a major next mountain to climb question. The last area, though, is societal inflections. And I think the biggest one that we haven't talked about enough, especially in countries like India, is around the generational inflection. We have one of the youngest populations in the world in India. In Africa is even younger. In the West, we have some of the most rapidly aging populations. Italy is a good example. Japan is another extreme, of course. I think
Yes.
how we account for those generational dynamics is going to be very important. And I don't think leaders currently in power today are thinking enough about that succession and how to hand over power and authority and autonomy
Oh, yeah,
responsibly
yeah.
back to the new generation.
Absolutely.
And it'll be often like after maybe a second drink or something, a CEO will be telling me about some of the frustrations they're having with the new workforce and how they're not able to see the world in the same way. And I don't think the answer is to try to a kid the younger people in the workforce about what it takes to be successful. I know that all of us have climbed careers, know how tough it is and what that demands. At the same time, though, we can't just go back to how we did things when we started work. There were many pretty unhelpful things then, in terms of working hours, all the way through to how we thought about many aspects of work. What I'm interested in is how to build a new conversation around this topic, have deeper discussions between organizations in the workforce. I'm trying to build a learning club of organizations interested in this idea, who want to learn together around it.
You need to share with our listeners a personal experience, that has really significantly changed, your approach to leadership, or has been a huge, part of your as a catalyst in your life.
Yeah, so I think when I was the first, few years as a CEO, I really struggle with this, and I would describe myself honestly, with the benefit of hindsight, as a leader in search of a problem. I'd watched all these films of leaders, I'd read all the books, I wanted to be a leader. I just didn't know what problem I wanted to help solve, right? And I think that really was the wrong way of looking at leadership, because you're doing it from a point of view really of ego, right? I think part of that was very much about me trying to play to my own ego, as opposed to getting lost in something bigger than myself. And I think one of the things that education was so powerful is that it was such an enormous problem, right? And it was much bigger than me. I did things that I had to do. I never thought I would do. I never thought I'd be working with the Indian government as an example. I'd never been trained in that. I hadn't, there was no qualification, but I had to do it, because if I didn't do it, no one else, it would not happen. So often the best advice I would give on leadership to anyone thinking about it, already in it, is to find something big in yourself, find a problem, an area that you feel you really care about, get lost in the problem and do whatever you need to do to make a difference. And all of the kind of imposter syndrome, fear, nervousness, that'll go away because the problem is so worthwhile and big as well. And I wish I'd learned that earlier in my leadership career as well, to be honest.
Tell me a little bit about Intrinsic Labs. I mean, you're doing some amazing work there. So tell us a little bit about the initiatives you're currently involved in.
Yeah, so what I love about the my work life now is I get to work with a really lovely range of organizations. I'm doing some work with a healthcare group in the UK that runs nursing homes. Just to give an example, I've just been helping an organization getting more women into politics for the first time. And actually, we have an election today in the UK, but about just under 10% of all the MPs, female MPs, come through this organization, who's across all parties, all spectrums. I've been working with a major private foundation around their approach and so on as well. Been doing some work with Skyscanner and Grant Thornton, so large corporates around some of this generational work. And so really whenever there's a question of a new mountain to climb, that's when I tend to be brought in. And what I love is just the really wide range of sectors, organizations. I have two clients currently in India, both in education. And what I'm trying to do is try to work with an organization for about 6 months and go through what I call a guided journey where helping them navigate those questions around direction, team potential, culture, and learning. And I'm also trying to build a learning club of leaders across the organizations to come together about 4 times a year, just to learn together, share, think about new ways of doing things. And also, it can be a lonely place being a leader. Learning actually, despite the context, many of the leadership challenges have very similar applications, and feeling they have a group they can work with over time as well. So yeah, but loving this kind of intense work over several months, but then hoping this network will also continue to support leaders beyond that intervention.
You're very active on LinkedIn. So how has that platform really helped you, in your work and mission?
So I find it really useful just to get ideas across. I think one of the things that is really helpful when we make a career is to think differently and share your point of view, and then people become comfortable with you. I know you're also very active on the platform, but what it does mean, I think, is that when you do have a conversation, people already know your work a bit, know how you think. There's something to engage with. I found it a very powerful way. I'm actually about to start a Substack. Substack is a chance to sort of have a more regular feed as well. It goes a bit more in depth and also be a little bit more creative around that as well. And also, I love elements of comedy, writing, poetry, all those things. I want to try and bring more of that lens into leadership and have a more of an integrated view of what we need to do to create this inflection we need for ourselves, our organizations, the world. But I think the key thing is to keep trying to write and express ourselves and coming up with new ideas. That keeps us fresh, but it also means we keep adding value to people we're working with and helping and serving.
Is there any book that you would recommend, for our listeners, who really want to follow your footsteps that they must read in their entire work life journey?
There's a lot of inflection on the last part around sort of reinvention. There's a question you asked. So that last part of the book is all about how we reinvent ourselves and keep learning. I think one of the things I would say that overall as one theme, which I think I talk about more in the book, is trying to be open to different influences. So often what happens is we tend to specialize quite early in our careers. Let's say we do finance or tech or whatever. All our friends, our social networks tend to be in finance or tech. That means we tend to see the world in a very linear, traditional lens. One of the things I see highly successful people doing is they keep a very broad social network and they embrace what we call weak ties. Not necessarily best friends, but lots of people that they stay in touch with who have different backgrounds and influences. So that allows them to think differently, connect dots in a different way, combine things differently as well in their careers and lives. And so I think really think about who you're spending time with. How can you broaden your network to really be open to new types of influences and new ways of learning? That's probably the biggest thing I'd probably say on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. The more people you meet, the more stories you hear, you definitely get a perspective, on life. Has there been any, particular person or organization that you look up to as a source of inspiration for the work that you do?
I think for me, it's been so many different people, I think, who sort of influenced my worldview. And what I saw people who are really great at, for example, executing, right? Leaders who are just amazing at getting things done. Leaders also who are very good, very deep thinkers. Leaders who are just great at getting and empowering their teams. And I think what I'm trying to do is trying to keep a very broad set of people, role models really, that I work with. Many of them are my clients. It's really great to work with people that I learn from, frankly, as much as I hopefully give value to. But I think from that, you can build a really interesting, almost composite of what makes great leadership today. And I think just that's something that keeps me growing and learning. I learn with them a lot. And it keeps me thinking about what the next area can be. How can the work I do kind of get richer and more useful for the leaders I'm trying to help and serve through this as well.
What message would you like to leave with our listeners, Sharath? There are so many people who look up to you. What would you like to share with them?
So I think this core idea that not all leadership time is created equal, that yes, that day to day, every minute does count, but you have these moments in our lives, our careers, our organization's life where there is a next mountain to climb question. Just take time to step back and really think about that deeply. Hopefully some of the ideas around inflection moments can help in the book and so on. But just think about that long-term direction first. Really give yourself space to figure that out, to align around it, get buy-in, talk to people around you. That could be whether it's a personal inflection in your career or in your wider organization. Once you have that, try to align everything around it, from your team to your culture to how you try to learn. And that will just mean everything just flows much more smoothly, and everything's moving in the same direction.
Thank you so much, Sharath, for being on today's episode. And this was the founder and executive chairman of Intrinsic Labs, Sharath Jeevan. And thank you so much for being on today's podcast. To you, our dearest listeners, you can find us on your favorite streaming services, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, and of course on all other major streaming services. With loads of love, we are The Mohua Show, where we talk ईमानदारी से.